We will have everybody introduce themselves, introduce your projects. I really would love to hear from you all how you're thinking about ReFi in the work that you're doing, and specifically, what does it mean to have like real world impacts? What does that mean to you in the work that you're doing? So I guess let's start with you, Gloria. Good morning, good afternoon. I believe it is where you are.
Yes, good afternoon. I am in Zuzala, here in Montenegro, still going in that one state, leading public goods and we of course, for a supermarket. But I've been able to step away. I talk a little bit more about ReFi DRC and that project. And just a little bit of my background. My bachelor's degree is in environmental studies. My master's degree is in computer science. And so I have this love for both like climate and for computers and solutions I can provide. But with ReFi DRC, my whole family comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I was the first person born outside of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I was born in Orange County. So this project is something that one day my mom had asked me specifically like what we could do in order to like benefit our family back in the DRC, and simultaneously there was a discussion in a Discord about ReFi and like ReFi in the DRC that spawned a whole like redemption down, and so I was part of that, and I feel like it's a good bridge for me to put my love for blockchain and all the work that I do there, but also be able to like benefit my family and those that are actually on the ground in the Congo, in the jungle of the Congo, and have them like have longevity, so it gets to be the best of both worlds for me.
Amazing. It's so glad to have you virtually. Pass it to you now, Erin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy. I'm Chief Growth Officer at Topple. Topple's a public permissionless layer 0 or modular chain. Been around for about 6 years and really focused on, answering this question: how can we build a blockchain specifically for sustainability and impact use cases? If you want to hear us shill a little bit more, it'll be in about 40 minutes for our talk. But my background is also mostly in social impact. So I work in development finance and in international development and economic development aid. Was mostly based in Eastern Europe and South Asia, so Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, India, and Nepal. And I worked a lot on designing micro-enterprise development programs, and I worked on a lot of infrastructure financing, agriculture projects, and I kind of just had this aha moment. I was working in Nepal in 2015 during the earthquakes, and I just was like, this industry is so broken, it's so fractured, billions of dollars pouring into, for the purposes of ostensibly of humanitarian aid. No one knows where it's going. It's being distributed inequitably. And I just kind of was like, this is really not how, I don't want to fight this battle for the rest of my career. So I started a small fair trade fashion business, actually, which is eventually what led me to Topple. I was really interested in supply chain traceability for my products. And so I joined the Topple ecosystem essentially because I literally Googled like ESG blockchains and I found Topple, and I was like, oh my God, I love what you're doing. I love the idea of being able to work on somewhat of a bigger scale. And so to your question of how does Topple think about ReFi, I think we kind of cut our teeth, so to speak, in the supply chain sector, really looking at, really across verticals, but a lot of supply chains obviously originate in the global south. There's a severe shortage of data about practices, both environmental and social, going on the ground. And Topple was really trying to sort of close this gap. There's another talk, I think, later today with Ned, which I think will be really interesting because he'll kind of dig into this idea of we have to marry the real world economy with Web3. And I think that's something that Topple's also always believed, is that we won't really see mass adoption of Web3 until we can sort of get businesses, corporations on board, ever how long that might take. But so, we kind of started focusing on supply chains. That kind of led us to like the broader sort of ReFi space, I would say, because essentially a lot of these communities are often really negatively impacted, but they're also sometimes positively impacted, right? We see a growth of, fair trade or sort of eco-friendly, whatever that means, projects that are focusing on, empowering communities. And for those people who are really kind of putting their money where their mouth is in their supply chains, we wanted to sort of understand, like, is there value that these companies can get out of this? Because if there is, like, we have to incentivize more of it. If there is no incentive, financial incentive for companies to do the right thing, we won't see it. It won't be sustainable. I mean, and we have like millennia of human history to prove that. So that's sort of what Topple's been working on.
Amazing. Isha, I will pass it to you, ask you the same question. How are you guys thinking about real world impacts at Cello?
Thank you. Just to quickly introduce Cello to some of you who may not be aware, Cello is a layer 1 blockchain. We're very ReFi focused, and that's been our mission from day one. And when I say ReFi focused, I think our first block was offsetting the carbon emissions that the chain was going to make. And so, like, clearly from day one, that's been a really big mission for the chain and for our founders. And I'm going to go a little bit of why I think I've joined Cello. So my background is I was in traditional finance and I did fintech, but I also grew up in like Africa, and I'm Indian, and I see like financial inequalities all through my life, And so for me, like a big part of like working in Web3 is like, I've seen this technology exists. It's very, very cool technology. We can bring this technology to places where financial infrastructure doesn't exist, right? And sometimes that's really great because there's no legacy systems to kind of break down, barriers to kind of, I mean, if you want to reinvent the financial infrastructure of the US or the developed world, that's really hard to do, right? But go put financial infrastructure or this kind of infrastructure in countries where doesn't exist is easier to do. And so one of the reasons I'm at Cello is like, hey, how do we like bridge this gap of like, we have this really cool technology that technology can do so much. It can bring up so much economic prosperity, financial inclusion, climate change, right? How do we kind of bring real world use cases and apply this technology in a way that kind of like, I don't want to say bottom of the pyramid because that's not kind, but I want to say places where this infrastructure doesn't exist and bring economic prosperity to those kind of places, right? Because when you talk about prosperity, there's economic clearly, but some places have natural prosperity. I come from Kenya. We used to have so much natural prosperity. And I keep talking about this. When I grew up from the airport to the city, right, you could see zebra crossing. And like, I learned the concept of zebra crossing by a literal zebra crossing the road. And my mom telling me, oh, that's why it's called a zebra crossing, because it's like black and white and like, look at the zebra crossing. And I can't see that anymore. And it's like in one generation, right? Like we're like losing so much of this ecological, I don't want to say like ecological capital in one generation. My kids will not see it, like, and the generations after it will not see it. And it's so sad. And so like, why am I not like, and the reason for me joining these kind of places is like, I need to be contributing towards giving back to that kind of like impact, right? I could be contributing to like a private equity fund, which is what I was doing a while back, right? But is that good for like the next generation? Am I building something for the next generation? Not really, right? And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm at Cello. And like at Cello, we really, really believe about real world use cases, but that's like UBI, a lot of stuff, the Climate Collect, Nirvan just spoke about, like a lot of the Climate Collect stuff is all built on Cello. Gainforest is here, another project on Cello. So like we really, really believe in like climate is one of the bigger use cases, but me specifically, because I'm head of DeFi at Cello, I also look at like financial inclusion, building up like financial inclusion at the local level, at the community level. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm Akshay from Ostrom. We're a natural capital valuation and ecosystem service valuation methodology. I guess just a little bit about me. I have a background in urban and environmental planning. Used to work as sort of a consultant for environmental consultancy groups back in the day, and sort of decided to transition to this. I think the way we started off really was we had a thought about how this thing could work, and we had a community that we wanted to work with. So I'll talk about both of those things. The community we wanted to work with is in Kamukunji in Nairobi, and they approached us at one point saying that, we have this asset that we've been taking care of, this ecological asset, and we've been taking care of it for about 10, 20 years. And we want to figure out how we can continue doing that while not having to put in our own money for doing it. And that really kickstarted our thought process into how can this ecosystem's value and the services that this ecosystem provides, the value of those be used to compensate the people who are taking care of it, who are stewarding it, who are sort of spending their time for it. So just going back to sort of what Caitlin asked at the beginning, which is about what we are thinking about ReFi. And I think for me also, it's like, if we can tie together these positive externalities with wealth creation, income generation for people who are contributing to those processes, we probably have achieved what we are set out to achieve at least. And that entire spectrum of all the questions, all the challenges associated with that sentence is probably what ReFi is at this point for us.
Amazing. It is so incredible I could literally sit here all day and talk about all the amazing work all of you guys are doing. But we only have 40 minutes, so I'll reel it in a little bit. Akshay, I would actually love to start with you and ask you, this is for the panel, but starting with you, what does like Web3 technology and blockchain or what you guys are doing at Ostrom, like what is that unlocking for land specifically that you think is maybe missing in like the Web2 world or how things have been done up to this point?
So there's two questions here, I think, which is there is the question of like what exists. And I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that at least in the global south, carbon projects or nature-based carbon projects will not be able to have the same kind of impact that they have in the West because most tenure is customary. People don't own land in the same way. There's not a lot of title deeds and things like that going around. So we need a method to detach ownership from impact. The fact that you're creating impact has to be valued separately, and the fact that you have ownership over land has to be valued separately. And if we're able to come to a point where we can do that, we might be able to sort of actually redirect the positives towards people who are making that impact. So from the perspective of land, it's from my own context, the community that we're working with does not own the parcel of land that they're working on right now. They've just taken care of it because it's an asset that they have. It's something they've shared for a long time. For them, right now, Web3 means nothing. I'm sorry to say, but it just means nothing. It's just a tool. It's a means to an end for us. For them, it's as good as just internet on the phone. But what I have started to notice like very recently is that they've, with the coming of other tools that allow them to utilize the benefits that they're able to generate from Web3, they've become more sort of open to it. And I mean, I see that as sort of a way forward because the more acceptance this gains, the more means I have to sort of communicate with the community better.
Yeah. Firstly, I think it's incredible that Web3 means nothing to your community because that's what we want. More distance from Web3 as it's great. But like from a seller perspective, I think we have some really cool ecosystem projects that are building interesting use cases for land. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I know Nirvan spoke a little bit about Collectivo that does geo NFTs. And then we also have this really cool project called Colors that is doing land restoration in Patagonia. And essentially what they're doing is you get an NFT for the land, parcel of land, and all the restoration is literally what you get the NFT for. And so it's like figuring out ways in which you could use land as an asset. And like he said, right, like land ownership and land rights, kind of separating the two. But also there's a lot of ecosystem projects that are using land, just like the right over the land and using that, bringing that to Web3 and preserving and conservation of that land. And then me sitting in Boston could like buy this NFT and like buy into the fact that like Colors will do restoration for this parcel of land in Patagonia. And apparently they do more carbon offsetting in Patagonia than they do even in the Amazon. So you could have really interesting uses for land and have like a lot more institutional capital kind of flowing in that doesn't really go to Patagonia to buy that parcel of land. Or even retail capital, people like us who are passionate about conservation of land and conservation of the environment kind of participate. So it kind of opens up the participation. And then land again, right, is like he mentioned, like land is separate. Land rights are separate to land conservation. And so Web3 also opens up the transparency of Web3 opens up the avenue for land rights. We have a few projects that are like, they do farming in Kenya, for instance, right? And the farmers on the ground have this random piece of paper that says that this land was allocated to them 100 years ago. Can they sell this land right now? Not really, because that paper, like there'll be somebody in the ministry who'll say this paper is not legal anymore, right? Can we then now use Web3 to have this ownership actually be owned by the landholders? Can we I'm not saying this can happen today, right? A lot of work needs to go from a political perspective, from like local jurisdiction, advocacy. But like Web3 has this really incredible opportunity to say, how do we bring land titles also in a clear, transparent way to like bottom of the pyramid in the global south, right? If, for instance, you have ownership or leasehold ownership, a lot of countries like India, for instance, you can lease land for 100 years. And you think that that's your land, right? 100 years is 3 generations, honestly. And after 100 years, if the king of that city-state comes back and says, hey, this land is ours, and you build all your wealth based on a shop there or based on some commercial asset there, then what does that mean? But if we put this as like a token, right, on Web3, if you tokenize this land asset, there's like transparency. Oh, this token's going to expire in 100 years. Can we plan for it, right? Because if it's in a paper somewhere in some cupboard that nobody's looked at, like, it doesn't matter. But like, to think about like really interesting use cases of Web3 for land ownership as well as like land rights, I think is important.
I cannot agree more. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I feel like a lot of times in this space, we have just in general, like a very carbon focused, carbon credits, carbon offsets, all of that. But hearing about like these amazing, impactful other areas that, people are doing work in is incredible.
Yeah, so I think to dovetail on what you were saying, Tupple's been really thinking about this issue of disputes and settlement, and there's obviously like big gaps, right? So the piece of paper that you're talking about, and this obviously it gets very complicated, specifically across the global south. But I mean, even here in the States, right? It's like some brother has a house that is deed inherited with like 6 other siblings, and 2 want to sell, 3 don't, and right, who actually gets to make the call. But we don't have what we're sort of missing is this ability to kind of talk to private data and private databases. And what we're kind of excited about with the smart contract language we've chosen, which is DAML, digital asset modeling language, is that we feel like this does act as kind of a bridge, because ultimately, and this is sort of crass, but like land disputes literally, kind of often come down to like gunfights, right? So you're talking about how can you enforce dispute settlements? Well, you can give people tools like Web3, or you can give them guns. In a lot of places, this is the reality on the ground. And I think that's the other part is what we see in a lot of communities is when you actually, and I think everyone up on the stage sort of mirrors this, but Top really believes in having boots on the ground, and that's hard, and it's not very scalable. It's taken us a long time to build our ecosystem. It's probably not like the most exciting thing for our investors, to be honest, right? But at the same time, I think we take a lot of pride in the fact that we do have real connections and real contacts with people in communities that they know better, right? How to take stewardship of their land. And I think when it comes to, as you mentioned, the carbon space, I mean, I think we work with a lot of really incredible carbon projects. Some of them are really focused on, I think what's interesting is they're all really niche, right? So instead of, they're really trying to answer to some of the larger, almost like hegemonic forces in the carbon space right now, and say, no, we're actually just experts in like soil sequestration or grassland sequestration in like this part of West Africa or this part of South Texas. And, as a Texas-born company, Topple, I think one like really big success is, I think we've really been able to see that ranchers actually believe in climate change. And so there's a project we work with specifically that works with American ranchers and helping them to understand like how they can we can financially incentivize them to take better stewardship practices. But I think 2 other projects that I think are worth mentioning that are actually not building on Topple, but I just love these projects and they're very much so in the SBS ecosystem are CocoDAO. So they were at the Twitter space. I think what Anna Maria is doing is absolutely incredible, right? So she has this sort of vision for incentivizing people in mostly indigenous communities in Southern Colombia. And but these people need to be rewarded for doing this, right? Like, so it's essentially like, how can they play a part in preventing deforestation? It's a lot easier and, sort of more expedient for them to deforest and make money, especially as many of these people are living on less than $2 a day. So we really won't be able to see like true community involvement, in my opinion, until we can actually incentivize. And in a lot of ways, some of these incentives like bounties, which I think are really interesting, right? Where you can have community sort of buy-in, people who can say, look, like this person over here, this farmer is violating like our protocol, or this person over here has been acting, is like a malicious actor. But even that, right, there's like on the ground ramifications for that type of reporting, right? These are ultimately a lot of them like really small communities where it's going to be pretty easy to figure out who submitted that complaint or who reported that bounty. And so I think we just really, what we try to focus on at Topple is really trying to understand how you translate what happens in these pretty conference rooms into like what actual on the ground ramifications are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually a beautiful segue to you, Gloria. I'd love your take on this question of, like what is Web3 unlocking for land specifically on the ground? What are some of the use cases that you find most interesting? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah. For me, it's a really interesting perspective because like I come from the technology background, but I'm like the one technical person in my family. So like anything technology doesn't mean like really much to like my mom and like the people who I know actually on the ground, other than like the actual technical needs for the day to day. So like having a phone, having a laptop, and having access to that. What runs the technology, what runs the underlying technology, they're like not really invested in. But it's been interesting to have, my mom is like the translator on my calls sometimes. And so she's translating all of these very technical discussions, and it's like the first time she's becoming aware of what can possibly be happening. And I tend to be like the bridge behind it. One of the things that is really fascinating for me is like because of my perspective in Web3, I've been able to like know that if we include builders, like they can build what needs to be happening, right, in general with builders, and then you can always put bounties out to like fund it. That's the get clean ways to create like mechanisms to have public funding of it. So I know that like funding won't really be a hurdle, or like building something, making something exist is not really like an actual hurdle. Like if you build it, think a chunk. But what's the actual hurdle is like listening to the people on the grassroots and seeing what their actual needs are and letting them delegate like the way that we gotta have to go. And so a lot of times when people are not understanding like or don't have the connections to the grassroots people actually do have their connections. They just have to have like be brought to the table and have that just be brought into the discussion. And what's hard in Web3 is like Web3 has its own like culture of how like we move and how we speed and like how we raise funds and go. And then sometimes grassroots runs on like, at least in my case, it runs on Congolese time. And like there's been a very deep history of distrust and like not really trusting other people to have the best intentions of the use of the land and the use of them, specifically like the economic incentives of it. And the people who are on the land, they themselves know the resources of the land the best, and how to best use it. So the one difficulty that constantly comes up for ReFi DRC was like when the land that is available, and just to back a little bit, the land that's available in the DRC is being up for auction, and they're like these, I think, 26 big parcels of land. And so the Web3 community wanted to put a bid in on the land in order to use it for regenerative purposes rather than to have like a oil company or someone else use it to extract the value of the land. And so the problem that we usually face is that the people who are on the grounds, they do want to be generative uses of it, but they also have direct financial needs. And so it's trying to convey to people something that's like not directly tangible, that like, hey, there's a way to like aid a new or long-term goal rather than to have this like short-term solution. And so sometimes that is difficult. But the people who I've interacted with grassroots wise, they are much more impacted by like case accountings or things to get in their hands, their immediate needs of things that will allow them to run their grassroots efforts a little bit more efficiently. And then secondary needs are like things that Web3 can come through and bring. But overall, I feel like the main thing that we can do is bring a lot more transparency into how things are going and things are being funded. And that's been like the most impactful for people. So yeah, if that makes sense. Like the raising of the funds and things of that nature, sometimes is that part of it that seems difficult is actually much easier. But it's actually getting like people to lead, like to having awareness of historical things that have happened and giving equity to the people who are on the grassroots for them to lead and them to say the direction that they want to go, and recognizing that they are the leaders of the land rights.
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel like all of you kind of mentioned this in your response, but for me personally, I see land as so tied to the people that are a part of that land. And another question that I wanted to ask you all is, what are the ways that you are engaging with Indigenous people, locals in like these processes and getting them involved in this? I mean, as great as it is to have like phenomenal technical knowledge and being able to like explain that, I think one of the things that is really important and that can oftentimes be undervalued sometimes, not just in like the Web3 ecosystem, but just generally, is like Indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge. So I would love to hear about the ways that you guys are all thinking of and working with local communities and engaging them in these like real world impacts, moving beyond the digital world to like actual real world. I don't know if anybody particularly would like to take the lead on that. Maybe.
Yeah. So admittedly, I think our work with actual Indigenous populations is pretty small. There's a project in Indonesia and one in Colombia that do work with, but that's only 2 projects that I can think of that are, I mean, a lot of the rest of our projects obviously are working with local communities, but they're not really classified specifically as Indigenous. The project in Indonesia, I think, is really interesting because this is a nutmeg project, a nutmeg traceability project, right? Huge legacies of Dutch colonialism in Indonesia, extracting massive amounts of nutmeg and other sort of natural resources for years. And now I think it's interesting that this is a Dutch company that's kind of rolled out this project. And essentially what they're doing is working with nutmeg farmers in really rural parts of Indonesia to really understand regenerative farming practices and actually be able to reward through basically a green premium for these products. So as I mentioned earlier, Topple does a lot of traceability when it comes to the sourcing of nutmeg and other spices. If you can actually sort of tell and prove to your buyers that, hey, this nutmeg was actually grown in a regenerative fashion, and here's the data, right? So they actually we were able to roll this out on a feature phone, which I thought was really exciting because like smartphone penetration is still pretty low in rural Indonesia, to where farmers can actually attest to, oh, I was actually paid like X amount on this day. I turned over this amount of nutmeg, and like didn't use pesticides or, if you actually go and look, and I'm happy to send the link to anyone who's interested, you can actually see where farmers were not paid, right? And so whenever people kind of ask the question, well, like blockchain can't fix everything. I mean, of course, like I think most people in this room would be the first to tell you that. But what it can do is it is this ledger of what did and did not happen, right? So when there are bad practices, it is recorded and it is immutable, right? So in the case of a farmer who wasn't paid the, $10 a kilogram that he was supposed to, or she was supposed to get paid, that data is available. And so, of course, that that action and that negative externality is still present, but there's an account of it, and that can be taken into the price calculation, right? And so I think that's kind of one of the communities that I think we work sort of most closely with. And then just because we have so much focus on agriculture, you don't have to tell people in, Tanzania and Kenya that climate change is a thing, right? Like, they get it. It's pretty obvious. And so for a lot of them, the projects that we work with a lot in coffee, we're really trying to incentivize agroforestry practices, for example, in coffee. And I think for anyone who was at SBS Colombia or Bogota, we saw a lot of projects working on this exact topic. And I think that in general, it kind of comes back to this green premium, which maybe isn't that sustainable in the long run, because at the end of the day, coffee really is a commodity. But as we do see a sort of uptick in coffee trading and specialty coffee trading specifically, and buyers focusing on supply chains, we do see this more sort of buy-in for these types of increased traceability projects.
Yeah, I think I can go next. Hopefully I won't have a coughing fit again. I'm sorry about that. So there's like a lot of really cool projects in the Cello ecosystem that actually work with local communities, and I'm gonna like kind of bucket them into a couple of. So we have a few projects that do community currencies, right? We clearly have a lack of credit and lack of capital in a lot of these like global south, bottom of the pyramid communities. And so like, instead of getting external capital, how do we generate like a method of community currency where you don't need an external capital provider to kind of come in and like say, hey, this is money. How do we kind of because essentially money is just like ledger entries, right? At the end of the day, we learned that in economics 101. And so why can't we do that on our own? We have this really cool technology. Why can't we do that? And so we have Collectivo who's doing this in Carousel. We have Resource Network. They have a bunch of like community currency projects. They started with one in the US, and now they've kind of gone all over Kenya, Uganda, South Africa. And so there's a lot of like community currency projects. So you don't even really need external capital. You can buy and trade using this community currency, and you settle with this community currency. And so essentially it's like, hey, community, this is like something that you can like build and grow whatever you want. And the community gets to decide what is incentivized, right? If the incentivization is regeneration of land, then you get more currency towards that. The community gets to decide what the price of that is, right? Collectivo does a really good job of this. And so like you get to decide the community, like what are your main priorities, right? And then also like you can do a lot of interesting things like peer-to-peer lending with these community currencies, right? So you are like completely taking out the external capital element from this. Like you're just giving the community like a way for them to be completely independent of like all externalities, which I think should be the way forward. That's just my radical view. But we should be like one of the way forwards, right? And then also like listening to the community is really important. We did a pilot in Kenya for like farmers there. And we went there and we were like, oh, we're taking this really incredible solution there. And it's all like feature phone enabled, right? And you're like, oh, we've even thought of it like that. Like they will not have like a smartphone, it'll feature phone enabled. You go there and you're like, can you just use this USSD code to access this loan, right? Simple, right? The community over there didn't even have enough money to send this one text message. And for all of us sitting in like wherever we're sitting now here, right? You don't think of these things, right? And so like building solutions that are like grassroots, bottom, and like listening to communities of what they need. It's easy for me to go there and give like a workshop of this is how you access a loan, right? But like think of it like, no, this needs to be coming from the community because trust is built from within the community. I can't go there and say, take this money and you can repay me in 3 months, right? Me saying that, whereas some like a leader in their own community saying that is extremely different, right? And so like at Cello, we kind of think about like, and it's not the Cello, it's like our ecosystem projects are so incredible. They always are thinking about like, what is really new, interesting ways of like engaging the community. Gain Forest, for instance, kind of like gave back to the community through MRV and things like that. So it's always like thinking of like, how do you give back to the community that you're pulling from, right? In like new, interesting, unique fashion, yeah.
Absolutely. I think what Isha just said makes a lot of sense to me as well, because we've been doing this for like some time now, and one of the rules that we've developed over time is that no tool will be built until that tool has been discussed with the community first. So because when we started out, we were kind of like, I'll just give you an example. We started out, we wanted to collect data about all the ecosystem assets, so trees, plants, whatever. And we built out this really cool GIS-based application where you could tap and you could sort of could drop the coordinates, image, everything will come in very nicely. It'll show up on a map in the backend very quickly. The community didn't get it. They didn't want to use it. It was too data heavy. Internet was slow, so it didn't help in sort of just doing anything with it. We built a Excel sheet Google form kind of thing, and they were cool with that. But because it's a light page, they get it. It has translation, which is an important thing. We could sort of add the coordinates. Someone else on our team would add the coordinates in, drop a point, and then add a reference number and add the coordinates at a later point. Increases our workload, but just it gives you perspective into the fact that there is you need to know what will serve the end community best, and then you can sort of model these things later. Sorry, I got lost in the story and I forgot what we were talking about.
Just like how you're working with, you're nailing it, how you're working with local indigenous communities, like how crucial that is for the work that you guys are doing and having that traditional knowledge.
Oh yeah, thanks. So I think we start off by building like, this might be a bad example, but I think 10 hours spent with community equals 1 unit of trust. You need 5 units of trust to start operating. You need 10 units of trust to start operating with money. And you need 15 units of trust for them to trust you with their money, or even more probably. So we've spent some time with them. So we're at 10 units of trust right now, I think. And that means that we can work with them pretty easily. There is still like a gap in terms of how our tools are built versus how communication happens locally. I think, for example, like again, I'll go into these stories a little bit. We were sort of trying to understand their local governance and how they do it. And we asked them, where does the council meet? And they were like, even last time we met at the market when we all went to shop. And the time before that, we met at the soccer field. And the time before that, we met. And this is just like all over the place. So to translate this into a governance model is really difficult. And I can't really take a governance model that exists and apply it there because it will never work. So, I'm just throwing the questions that we're dealing with out there. We don't have any answers yet. We will discover them as we go along this process, like everyone in the ecosystem will. But I feel like it's an interesting sort of set of problems that we're solving for right now with these sort of governance issues and financial issues. And as much as possible, if we can do it, like Isha said, bottom up, it helps like towards the end.
Absolutely. Well, I literally could talk about this all day with all of you guys. You are phenomenal. I want to close us out and kind of bring us home here and leave room for some questions as well from the audience. I would love to ask each of you in 60 seconds to tell me, where would you like to see this ReFi space in a year from now? And again, specifically focusing on like real world impacts. What real world impacts would you like to see 1 year from now? I'm sure we can like dream and imagine 5 years from now and 10 years from now, this beautiful world that we're living in. But I really want to focus in on like 1 year from now. Where would you like to see this space? And then also call to action. Let us know where we can get connected with each of you and your project, how people can get involved, and the challenges to do that in 60 seconds. Just give me your best elevator pitch.
I think for us, I think it's about setting realistic goals for where each network or each project sees themselves, right? And for us, we really want to see 3 million people across the global south interacting with the Topple blockchain in 18 months' time. We're a lot earlier stage, obviously, than Celo and some other networks. And we really want to see 5,000 projects across the global south interacting with the Topple blockchain. To make that possible, what I what I'd really like to see sort of take root in ReFi, and to earlier points that were made, is the community doesn't care about Web3. Well, like most people don't care about Web3. And, one of the biggest problems that we have is the user experience is just absolutely clunky and terrible. So we spend a lot of time on the products that we design for these communities. Again, it's painstaking, right? Like what are the levels of literacy? What are the levels of numeracy? This needs to be a very sort of image heavy application, or it needs to be, something that someone in a rural area who's never finished, school can use. And I think that that's hard, and blockchain people tend to be like feature crazy. And we kind of need to just simplify and focus on what's important. And I think that we're figuring that out, but I think that's a trend that I'd really love to see come to fruition. It's just like simplification of user experience.
1 year from today, I don't want to go on any calls defining what ReFi is. I would love that. I want just everybody to know what ReFi is. And Web3, non-Web3, ReFi should just be a thing. 1 year from today, I shouldn't be sitting here. I should just have a bunch of Celo builders and non-Celo builders talking about this. And they should be talking about like real world use cases that have like really grown exponentially. And when I say real world use cases in like the global South, where they've had like impact for like the kind of like move the economies and those communities like 5 years or 10 years ahead of where they are today. And so that's hopefully where we are 1 year from today. And then I know you said, where can you kind of learn more about Celo? Please go to celo.org. We have a really incredible community of builders and developers and investors too, that kind of like all are very ReFi focused. Any project on Celo is on Celo because they are passionate about our mission. And so you can find us on celo.org, or we're on Twitter or Discord, etc., etc. Yeah, and happy to chat with anybody if you have any questions after this.
I think everything that all of you just said, I'm hoping that that's already in place. And I'm hoping we are at a point where more alternative models apart from carbon credits are around, and some of them are accepted widely for us to sort of do more things. On average, by the way, on an ecosystem project, the community gets 10% of the benefit. If we can take that to 15, that'll be a win, and we can go from there. Sorry, I'm wrapping up. You can follow us on Twitter, DE_Ostrom. And that's the best place to reach out. And I'll let Gloria go next.
Yeah. In order for me to even paint a picture of like where I want to be in 1 year, I have to look at where I was like a year ago. And I know that specifically when it comes to the Sustainable Blockchain Summit, that was like my first insight into like carbon offsetting, and like it was all brand new. And then within a year later, like I getting to do this project. So I think that within a year from now, I would like to do the whole like show no shill, and actually come back with like what we learned from creating like either a local node, right, in the BRC, and like some of our pain points and whatnot. And I think that if I had my show no shill, it would be a lot of like what actually came out of it, and how did we lose either like my land that I own the DRC as a test case, or actual the people on the ground as their test case, and what was given back and how that they felt about it. So I'll put that as a challenge for me, that this time next year I hope to come out with like more bounties, more needs, and more connections, and maybe even a trip to the DRC for people to have a collaborative approach. That would be what I would want to see from it. As far as what's the best way, right now, ReFi DRC is a very small centralized group that's working on it, but you can always either find us on Giveth. We're going to have a little donation there, or you can follow me on Twitter, which is at @gkunwala is the best way to get in contact with me on Twitter or on Telegram.
Beautiful. I think I'm officially going to steal that from you. Next year, SBS official motto is show no shill. So remember that. Thank you all so much for an incredible conversation and for sharing all about these amazing projects.